Hey, this is great. All right, good afternoon. Welcome to our session. How many of you are from the North or the East Coast? Thank you for coming indoors because I know the temptation to be outside where it's not snowing. I appreciate that. And we have some stiff competition, so thank you as well. You're here for leveraging side-by-side collaboration into institutional redesign, I hope. And if not, you should stay. It's going to be great. My colleagues are fabulous. My name is Marissa Schlesinger. I am the Director of Academic Affairs at Kingsborough Community College in Brooklyn, New York. And I'm just going to give a couple of framing remarks, let you know what's about to happen in this room. You will not be a passive audience. That's not how any of us work, so prepare to be engaged. You should all have before you a folder with some handouts. We'll be using those. If you do not have a folder, or if you would like to view these in other formats, if you've downloaded the app for the conference and you navigate to our session in your schedule, all of the handouts and our PowerPoint are there right now. You could follow along on your phone or iPad or what have you. All right, so institutional redesign, that's a big thing, and we're hearing about it a lot this week. And we're going to present some of our thoughts on it to you. And we're going to be doing so through the lens of a FIPSE dissemination grant that Kingsborough Community College held for 3 years. Back in 2010, we got this grant, and you're going to meet some of the folks who worked on the grant with us, and you're going to learn some of the lessons that we learned over the course of the grant. So let's see. Back in 2009, I guess, when we were putting this together, we knew at Kingsborough that we had had success. We could look around, we could feel it. The data were coming in. We had tons and tons of data saying, yes, there is success at this school. Your students are doing very, very well. We felt it. We knew something was right. And folks would say, hey, Kingsborough, how are you doing this? Can you tell us what you're doing? Can we have the success that you are having? And we couldn't quite tell them what was going on. So we sat down and thought about it. A large team of senior administrators, and I'll just name for you sort of the key group who got this going. Our then president, Dr. Regina Peruggi, our then provost, now interim president, who's with us today, Dr. Stuart Suss, sitting over there. Our VP of many things, including right now academic affairs, and his title's too long, Stu, I'm sorry. David Gomez, he's our interim provost right now. Rick Fox, our director of institutional effectiveness and strategic planning, and Rachel Singer, who's now with Achieving the Dream, but at the time was director of academic affairs at Kingsborough. So that amazing team sat down and brought in a lot of other folks, because that's what we do at Kingsborough. We bring in a lot of folks around the table, and we started to put together what we thought was working for us, and they thought, will it work elsewhere? Is what we do in Brooklyn going to be successful anywhere else in the country, or is it unique to our water, to our air, to our pollution? And once we got the grant, we pulled together a team of schools representing North and South, East and West, urban and rural. We brought together Grossmont Community College from San Diego, California, Norwalk Community College from Norwalk, Connecticut, Prairie State College from Chicago Heights, Illinois, and Halifax Community College from Weldon, North Carolina. We've got 2 folks from Halifax with us here today. And with these 4 colleges, who each sent teams representing all areas of their faculty and administration, we began the process of exploring what worked at Kingsborough, what might work there, will it work there? And we learned some fabulous things. Now, we learned these things because we had a very strong developmental evaluation team, and they are represented here today, and everyone will introduce themselves in just a minute. And the evaluators led us through what we led the other colleges through. That is a multi-year process of reflection, of discussion, of thinking and rethinking. And over the course of many phone conversations, 2 summer institutes, more meetings than I can recount, but the good kind, the productive kind of meeting, we learned a couple of things. First of all, we learned that, yeah, what we do in Brooklyn can work elsewhere. And that was gratifying. What we also learned is that it's not a cookie cutter. There's not one size fits all, one model that we can just sort of run off and hand out and say, do this and you will have success. What we learned is that while there are core ingredients, the way they come together will vary from place to place, just like that great recipe that every member of your family tweaks just a little bit to make their own. So today, all these great folks are going to share with you the core ingredients, some of the more specific lessons we've learned, and some of the things that we think will help you bring back to your campuses and perhaps get a ball rolling there, or rolling faster if it's already rolling. So let's see, I guess I'll pass now over to Gillies and ask you all to introduce yourselves and keep it moving.
My name is Derek Price. I'm the principal at DVP Praxis, consulting firm in Indianapolis, Indiana. And Kingsborough brought me in to provide developmental evaluation services for the FIPC project. Quite an exciting project, and I immediately went out to two of who I think the smartest and most thoughtful folks that I know that care about quality teaching and learning. And that is the folks that they're about to say hello from the Evergreen State College and the Washington Center for Quality Undergraduate Teaching, who represent, along with myself, the developmental evaluation team.
Good afternoon, I'm Emily Lardner. I co-direct the Washington Center with
Gillies Malnrick. I'm B.T. Brown, Dean of Curriculum Programs at Halifax Community College in Weldon, North Carolina.
And I'm her partner, Barbara Bradley Hasty, Dean of Student Services at Halifax Community College.
Thanks, everyone. Now I'd like to give you a kind of preview, just quickly, of the session. We're going to divide it into three chunks. First, the big ideas of the Jigsaw project that we surfaced over the period of the project, the strategies for institutional redesign, and some of the insights from the project. And we promise you, as we said in the write-up, that we will give you tools that you can use back home. To begin with, though, we want you to introduce yourself in a very particular way. Now, what matters here is your name, of course, your institution, but what really matters is that you choose a project that you're going to use as a mini case study. Now, I'm imagining, maybe I'm in the wrong place, are all of you involved in innovative projects on your campus? Like, can I just get a sense of it? Yeah, right, of course, because you're here at Achieving the Dream. How many of you are involved in more than one innovative project? Oh, yeah. Now this is looking more real to me. How many of you are involved in 3 innovative projects, if not 4 or 5, and in your lifetime, a gazillion, perhaps? Is that true? Some of you might even have heard the word project-itis, or initiative fatigue, or whatever else you say. And so what the purpose of this session is to figure out how we can turn innovative projects into sustainable institutional change and then institutional redesign. So here's your charge. You need to pair up with someone. We recommend that you do this in 2s. If you're at a table where there's 3s, why don't you get up and find someone? So why don't you do that first so that you're in pairs? Let's do that quickly. Pairs. You guys can do that. Okay. Introduce yourself. Yeah, that's it. Okay. So now, if you're in pairs, has everybody got a partner? Let's see, we've all got partners. Okay. So now here's the, if I can have your attention just for a moment, here's the bit about reciprocity. This is going to be practice for later about what we're going to do in the session. Now what you're going to try to do is give your partner the same amount of air time that you take yourself. And so those of you who have a good mind for time, you have 4 minutes each to introduce yourself, your institution, and to tell the other person about your innovative project. Okay? So off you go, and at the end of that time, we'll ding a little bell so you'll know we're ready to proceed. Thanks.
Workshop? Yes. Talking about it? Everything's great.
If you haven't yet switched, this would be a good time to do so.
So are they going to be like 15 minutes? How long are they doing? She said about 4 minutes, and then they were going to switch, probably do another 4 minutes. Probably got a good 3-4 minutes left.
Okay, maybe this doesn't work, or it works too well. We still on? Okay, super. All right, that was wonderful. I'm glad that all of you took time to introduce yourself and talk about a project, and that project is going to come back over and over again this afternoon, so keep that in mind. My task here is to tell you a little bit about the big ideas that emerged from the FIPSI project that then we're going to then walk through with you in an interactive way to help you experience it, at least in a small little flavor of what we did. What's important about, I think, Kingsborough's theory of change as depicted up here is that when we showed up at the start of the FIPSE project and started to ask them, so how'd you do it? In the same way that they had been asked by many, many colleagues before, they said the same things to the evaluators. They don't really know. We hadn't really thought about it. And so we walked through a number of processes to help them craft a theory of change. So this is a theory of change that was done retrospectively. Okay, so they had to think back about this work. And in fact, one of the things that they talked about was how organic the work really seemed. And so we began to think about, I'm an evaluator, so I'm always out there. I want to start with a theory of change right before we do work. I want to start up front and figure out what the theory of change is so I know how to evaluate people's progress over time. But here I was at a place that didn't really have a theory of change, but were effective, and we had to do it retrospectively. And one of the things, that we sort of came up with is that, the theory of change isn't deductive. It didn't start off with a way to create this change up front. It wasn't an intentional, pre-thought out, determined way. It was actually inductive. They learned it over time by practicing certain behaviors at the college through numerous small pockets of innovation, projects, you might say, numerous projects over many years, and over time, they had a breakthrough. And they didn't predict when the breakthrough was going to come. It just sort of happened. And then suddenly here they were with great numbers, and everybody's asking about how they did it. And they had to go back and reconstruct sort of how that work happened. And so this was a visual that our team put together to sort of depict the theory of change, because there's lots of small build-up, pockets of innovation happening at community colleges all over the country. And certainly if you're an Achieving the Dream community college, you're doing innovative things. Right? And those innovative things, in fact, are contributing to institutional change. And that's a good thing as well. But one of the things we found in this work is that institutional change and institutional redesign, or maybe even transformation, are not the same thing. So that when you're doing something innovative on a smaller scale, you're doing lots of good things. You might even be breaking down some barriers, but you're doing it in a small way. You definitely are changing your institution. You definitely are making changes in policies and practices and processes in order to achieve the outcomes you want on a given project. But these things tend to still remain in their different domains. They don't necessarily cut across and go larger. And so we came up with this idea that institutional change, you need a lot of practicing of institutional change before the institutional breakthrough and redesign actually happens. So what is the difference? Well, because I can't articulate it as well as we wrote it, I'm going to read it to you, because I think that's the best way to articulate these ideas. So institutional change and institutional redesign are different but reinforcing concepts. So institutional change refers to specific projects that require changes in policies, practices, processes within a well-defined domain, such as advising or registration. Okay, so you're really focusing on something narrow. Not that it's easy, not that it's not a lot of things have to happen, but it's a very specific, well-defined domain. Institutional redesign, however, is much deeper, systemic change, and it extends beyond those specific projects. It actually encompasses new ways of working together, campus-wide, across and within divisions and departments, as well as up, down, and across administrative hierarchies. So it's not just about the good work you're doing on a project, which should be lauded and encouraged and learned from, but it's about how those ways of working together on a project ultimately become the way you work on everything on your campus. And it doesn't necessarily just happen intentionally. It didn't at Kingsborough. At Kingsborough, it's almost as if they woke up one day and realized, wow, this is sort of how we do everything. But it didn't start that way. It started just like it starts with all of you, with small pockets of innovation where you're trying new things, you're trying to work together in new ways on a smaller scale. And ultimately, if you do that over and over and over again on many, many different projects over time, This theory of change says a breakthrough moment can occur in which suddenly your culture has completely changed on your campus. You're doing everything in different ways, not just on this project or that project, but in everything that you do. And this is what we're hoping to share with you today and have you work at your tables on your project to think about how this happens. How do you do this? And we created some tools, and I don't say we meaning the evaluators, I mean we, all of the colleges participating, along with our help and of course along with Kingsborough's leadership, a number of tools that help walk the colleges through this process. And the very first thing we're going to do is have our colleagues from Halifax come up and talk to you about the first tool in your process. And they're going to share with you one of the other big ideas that we think was critical, at least from the Kingsborough case at this point in time, which is side-by-side collaborative leadership. So you remember I talked about institutional redesign being cutting across all divisions and departments, working up and down hierarchies across things, right? There's side-by-side leadership. It wasn't about necessarily flattening the culture. It wasn't that the provost or the president or the VP of Student Affairs didn't still have the authority and the decision-making within those domains. But the way the decisions were determined and came about and implemented were not resting in one person's authority. And that was the shift that occurred at Kingsborough that we try to document, we hope we'll walk you through today. So side-by-side collaborative leadership, we're going to learn about that. I'm going to turn the mic over to BT and Barbara, and they're going to walk us through their experience with this, which, by the way, wasn't all hunky-dory when we started. And they're going to help us and help you sort of go through, at least in a mini way, the experiences that they went through.
Before we switch over to the campuses, I want to talk a little bit about the challenge of using a theory of change that was derived from a campus that had been practicing for a while, and then apply it to a cohort of campuses who said, sure, we'll sign up for a relatively short 2-year project to learn how to make our schools work better. So how do you try to teach a theory of change? How do you set up a graduate seminar in organizational change that's real and useful for the schools that are operating in very different contexts than the school that had been doing all of this work? So as the core elements in the Jigsaw project itself, the FIPSE-funded project, there were 3 things that we said we were going to try to do with the teams that were participating. So this is the translation of what Derek was just describing to a way of working with a group of schools. One big idea was you have to practice a project, any project. You have to agree on one student-centered project that's your practice project. That was really challenging, and our colleagues may talk about that. And it was challenging because everyone who starts to work on a project wants the project itself to be successful, but we were also trying to use the project as a way to learn about how to do projects. So you had to be clear, focused, precise, and also able to step back from it and say, interesting, we're practicing doing a project together. So that attachment, we've got to make it work because it matters for students, with the ability to be reflective about how are we making it work. That was the work of having a project, and that was really important. The second thing that Derek's alluded to and that you'll hear more about was helping Kingsborough discern a set of factors or elements that have to be in place on a campus in different proportions, but they all have to be present to practice projects successfully over and over again, to be able to shift the institutional norms in the way that KCC had been able to shift their institutional norms. So we call those things core elements, and you'll have a chance to work with core elements and talk about them on your campuses later today. And then the third piece of the project design, which really mattered, were the peer-to-peer collaborations and the sense of agreeing to sign up for a program where you said, sure, we're happy to figure out how to make our schools work better for students, but we really only want to sign up for that if other people are signing up for that too. because it turns out in a peer model, much like Achieving the Dream but smaller, there are lots of opportunities for learning, cross-job talk, the lead institution, KCC, but also there's a sense in which all campuses, all the time, are having to think about how is it we work together on behalf of students, because things change in states, things change on the campus, things change in leadership roles. So no school that figures it all out hasn't figured it out forever. We haven't figured that one out yet. So being with peers, so there was the element of collaborative learning, was another really important dynamic, and people were willing to talk about their processes with each other, including the things that didn't work very well.
Just wanted, again, to go back to this notion of side-by-side collaboration, because it was very hard to do. And it's really about process trumping project, but the project mattering. You'll notice that if you look here on the institutional change interventions, it was set up so that every college said when they were going to bring their project into fruition. It was a public moment said in advance. So everyone is working towards a known date at their campus. So you have to imagine that. Then you have to imagine people coming together who are normally not in the room together, that represent different subcultures of the institution. And moreover, people who don't have another way of talking to one another except the way they traditionally speak to one another. And perhaps you've experienced that when you discover that the project you are working on you're so keen about over here, people said, but we don't have the staff to do that. How could we possibly do that? And so forth and so on. So the side-by-side collaboration turns out to be extraordinarily important. And again, it's about that tension where we wanted teams not only to do the project, but to learn from the process of practicing this new way of treating one another in brief.
Yes, and we are Halifax Community College. It's a small community college in eastern North Carolina, and this was a challenge for us. We were fortunate to have been invited to participate in this project. We weren't quite sure what we were getting ourselves into at the onset, but it was a journey for us, and it's still a journey for us. Going into this collaboration was something new for us. I don't know about you all, but we had lots of projects going on campus, and sometimes we found that the right hand didn't know what the left hand was doing, and there was duplicity of efforts, so somebody in student support services might have been duplicating something that we were trying to do in curriculum, and so it really wasn't necessarily the most efficient way of doing things, although we thought we were pretty good. This self-assessment checklist that you will be doing in a minute helped us focus our attention on the things that were important, and helped us not just guide the project that we were doing, but guide the way in which we accomplished the project. And so looking at the fact that it was a student-centered project, and then you'll drill down on that assessment checklist to answer further questions. Is our team operating as an effective, collaborative, administrative team? You know, if we're kind of overseeing this project, are we being effective? And again, you've got some great questions there that might be kind of scary. They were for us, but they helped us keep that focus. And then thirdly, is our team modeling collaborative leadership in decision-making for the college at large? We certainly couldn't ask them to be doing something that we couldn't do ourselves. So as the team that was sort of heading this up, we had to constantly check ourselves and recheck ourselves to make sure that we were practicing what we were preaching. And that would be the only way we felt to make effective change. Barbara?
Look in your folder to make sure that you have the sheet entitled Leveraging Side-by-Side Collaboration. If you don't have it, raise your hand and we'll get you one before we move any further. Emily has them. Emily has them. And then there's some people on this side who need them also. And these are individuals who don't have a folder, I'm assuming. Right. Don't have a folder, I'm assuming. Now, you see how small, put that sheet beside you. Put it beside you in comparison. See how small that sheet is and see how big I am? I didn't like the questions on this sheet. I didn't like them because I thought, you think that I'm going to answer that sitting around with my peers that I work with every day? You must be kidding. But then I had to say to myself, okay, you really want to make a difference. You signed on for this right here. It's about students, it's not about you. Answer what the doggone sheet is asking you to answer. That's exactly what I did. And so you're going to now look at that sheet, what that sheet is asking you with the people at your table, and if you have peers there, that's good, and if not, you're going to work on it, and you're going to have about 5 to 7 minutes, and then we're going to come back together, and you're going to tell us a few things, and we're going to tell you some more things about our experience. So you can start that right about now.
Okay, how's everybody doing? You had plenty of time? Had some time to share your thoughts, your impressions about this checklist with folks at your table or your partners? One of the things that we noticed as we were beginning to go through this process and having these conversations is that, I mentioned earlier, they were very difficult. And two of the areas in which the differences arose, one was where differences of opinion typically happen and why. And we found out, or at least it sort of seemed to us, and I use this analogy, it's kind of like when you go to the hospital and you have a baby, and as the mama you have the pediatric nurse, and then you've got the obstetrics nurse, and the pediatric nurse is wanting to say, you know, and take care of what's good for the baby, and the obstetric nurse is wanting to do what's good for the mama, and sometimes they didn't agree. I remember them fighting just about because of their particular part and what they were trying to protect. And so we kind of found that out. Barbara and I have been fortunate. We've worked together for many, many years, but still, you know, she's in student services and I'm in curriculum, so I'm protecting the faculty and the curriculum, and she's looking after, you know, the student services and student support and tutoring. And so we had to go into this and sort of put those aside. We had to be able to practically see things the way our colleagues were seeing them as well. So we had to release a little bit of that ownership and share their vision as well as them sharing ours. And Barbara's going to talk to you a little bit about challenges around divisions, and then we hope that you will share with us.
It says challenges around divisions or roles and why this is the case. If you're in student affairs, raise your hand. If you work in student affairs, raise your hand. Okay, if you work in academic affairs, raise your hand. And so those were challenges for us. You know, I was sitting at the table with our VP of Academic Affairs, and I'm thinking my way, because I'm thinking, okay, I've got to protect student services interests here, student affairs interests here, and she's on her side thinking, okay, I've got to protect academic affairs here, and so it's just kind of like a whoosh. And we had to figure out, okay, how are we going to merge the two? Because at the end of the day, it really wasn't about academic affairs, and it really wasn't about student affairs. It was really about who? It was really about students. And so that was a huge epiphany for us, if I would say so. And so now what I'd like for you to do, because we're doing all the talking, is who would like to share the feelings that they have about the checklist as they were sitting and going through it? Don't everyone volunteer at once now?
What I don't notice on the checklist, but I'm sure if I studied it more, I'd find it, but that would be people in the same discipline area working on the same project to benefit students, and some are visionaries without rules, and others are gatekeepers.
Yes. Anyone else? Oh, right here, great.
I think that I don't think I know that many times you hear complaints from faculty that from the student services side, the students were misadvised. They were placed in the wrong courses. And then student affairs folks feel like whatever the faculty want, they rule, faculty rule. So if they don't want to do it, it's not going to happen. And they don't want to give us the time that we need sometimes to work with students that we're partners in this. And that's one of the conflicts that sometimes we have to deal with. Not always, you know, we're coming along.
Anyone else? Over here, okay.
We were curious, neither of us found this particularly difficult to answer, basically. At my school, we're pretty bad at all of them. But I was wondering from your perspective, which one of these would you not want to answer?
Are you asking me? Anyone here? Which one of these would you not want to answer? They said that it's unanimous. Anything about the president, they did not want to answer. And over here she said no.
Our president is very supportive about this and is open to conversation and willing to listen and willing to implement. We have a very open communication.
Very good. Anyone else in this room wanting to share?
I'm from Los Angeles Community College in Los Angeles Elementary Tech. One of the things you just mentioned, it wasn't easy for us not to talk on the table because our ARC data was abysmal. So with the data, given that we use data to make decisions, and given that the data was not up to snuff, it was easy for us to come to the table. We still had the issues of these silos or personal views on things, but we had to get to the point of why are we here as for the students. And we're more unified, even though we are in different departments. We're trying to get away from that, but we all have a common goal for success.
Thank you. It's a good thing I'm in shape, right? Yeah.
For me, I would think that the difficult question is of having an effective mechanism for dealing with conflict. Whatever, whether it's between faculty to faculty, faculty student affairs, who's ever on the team and has different perspectives, and then how do you make decisions when conflict, sometimes both people just have two different opinions and they both are valid.
And I saw your hand right here. I don't want to ignore you.
Well, actually, I think we have a good president, but the thing about the president is when we finally get to that level, and actually we're a small college, we collaborate really well, we oftentimes get told that the board or the chancellor, we're in a multi-college district, won't support that approach. And so the president gets essentially stuck between what we're hearing from the state, the board, the trustees, and our chancellor, and what she's hearing from the rest of the campus, even when we collaborate effectively.
Very good. Oh, another person over here. Yeah. She said I'm kind of like Oprah running around in here. I'm like, yeah.
I found the second question in part 2, our team has a clearly identified purpose and focus as being a key element. And I just want to add to that a lot of times with that some of us don't even see the problem being the same problem. And I think that's a barrier for us.
I want to go back to what Ruth said. Is your name Ruth? I got it right? Okay. Ruth said oftentimes, two people may have a thought, and they both may be right about the thought. And what do you do? And for us, BT is going to take us into this jump.
Oh, okay. Someone, did I see a hand back here real quickly if you want to?
We have a panel of ombudspersons on campus when there are differences that help us to mediate and negotiate. But there's an excellent book entitled Necessary Endings that I would highly recommend, and I can't remember the author right now, but I'm reading it. But Necessary Endings is excellent because it helps you to look at when something isn't working and it hasn't been working and you want to hang on to it. Helps you work through it and how you let it go and how you navigate that and work that through in an organization.
Amen to that. So one of the things that we came up with, because it was difficult for us, we didn't feel like all of our voices were heard the same. Whether rightly or wrongly so, some folks on our committee felt like they couldn't speak their minds. So we developed this particular set of guidelines from a set of guidelines that we received from Kingsborough Community College at the beginning. And Barbara has to take credit for this. She came up with the JUMP, journeys that ultimately maximize our potential. And we kept that theme all the way through, and this is our logo. Designed it at our advertising and graphic design office. And we put it on the top of our agendas, and we put it on the top of the guidelines, and we went over these guidelines at the beginning of every meeting. Whether it was for the Kingsborough project or we took it into other committee meetings that helped us institutionalize this way of doing things.
And she mentioned about a book, and so what we realized was that we are just like our students sometimes. We have people who love to read and people who don't want to read. So having this little quick cheat sheet from Kingsborough here was a huge help. And it says, check our titles and our egos at the door. You know, that's hard sometimes, really hard. And then the next one says, keep in mind that this working environment should be a safe one. Some teams include both subordinates, some teams include with the direct reports, and you've got to realize or keep in mind that, okay, I'm sitting here and I'm the VP or I'm the dean, and there are people at this table who report to me. I have to respect what they're saying. I may not agree with it, but I have to be willing to be a good listener, because if I'm not a good listener, they're going to shut down and not talk because I have just dominated the conversation with my opinion. And then there is, all team members have a voice deserving of the equal respect. Do not assign blame. When it's going really well, everybody's like, yay, yay. But when the ship sinks, everybody's going, it was him, it was him, it was not me, it was him. So that was one of the things that we had to remember, was to not assign blame, to discuss each issue with tolerance, acceptance, and an open mind. And then we had to agree that solving the problem was everybody's responsibility and not just one person, because we believe that every person, regardless of who he or she is, wants to be valued, wants to be heard, wants to know that their opinion matters. And so you have to be willing to respect that. And then the last one is, the focus should be on the task at hand, not on the people in the room. And the focus at hand should be who? Always students, not about the people who are sitting around the room. And then the last one is, keep a sense of humor. If you can't keep a sense of humor, it's going to be a long, drawn-out process. And those were just some of the norms that we use for team building on our campus. And Derek is going to come and tell you about some core ingredients, because it really is much more than just guidelines for team building. It goes much deeper than that.
Now, as you'll see immediately up on the slide, one of our core ingredients is side-by-side collaborative leadership, something that BT and Barbara just sort of helped you think about and use a self-assessment instrument to think about those kind of concepts. And there are two takeaways, I think, for me, at least at that point, or at this moment in time, listening to that conversation. And the first is practice, practice, practice. You know, a lot of this project is about practicing new ways of working together, and that's what JUMP was about. It was reminding them, when they got together to talk about the project they were working on, listen folks, we are trying to work differently than perhaps we're used to working, and let's remind ourselves every time. One of the favorite things I like to do when I'm at conferences like this is quote Russian, because I don't speak it anymore, but I used to. And my favorite phrase is "Повторите мать учения," which is basically, repetition is the mother of learning. You get good at collaborative leadership by practicing collaborative leadership. And you practice collaborative leadership on projects. And that's why you've got a project in your mind that we're thinking about and that we're going to come back to again. So side-by-side collaborative leadership is one of our ingredients. Now, if I could just remember the second point that I was going to say, I might remember it later. I've completely forgotten it now. So let me talk about these core ingredients. These were not core ingredients that we started with. We didn't start the Kingsborough FIPSI project and say, we know the core ingredients that you got to do. This is what came out of the work, just like the theory of change came out of the work. And side-by-side collaborative leadership was one of those things. But there are other things too, and my job here is it's a handout for you. You've got the handout here, which is up on the screen, a little circle with a triangle in it. And inside of it are 7 core ingredients. Side-by-side leadership's one of them. And on the other side is basically a definition. Right? And so I obviously don't expect to give you a quiz at the end of this. You're not going to have to remember today at this moment what these ingredients mean, but there are a couple of definitions I think are important. One is at the very bottom, which is about intentionality, and this is about being deliberately focused on policies, practices, processes that address both the concrete project that you're working on and the new ways of working together collaboratively. We heard earlier this was really hard because, quite frankly, the tendency is to hone in on the project and to forget about this. Or, wow, you've got a really go-getter on your campus who wants to take charge and take the lead, and so you let him or her sort of take the ball and roll with it. That might get you to the concrete project. You might make progress that way, but you're not going to make progress towards institutional redesign that way. Presidential engagement is another one of our core ingredients, and this is about buy-in and commitment of the president to empower people at the college. This isn't the president making all the decisions. This is the president putting people together at all different levels within the hierarchy, across divisions, who will work collaboratively together and practice side-by-side leadership, and sometimes maybe having to step in when somebody's acting up. Maybe Barbara was acting up sometimes, and the president needs to be the one that steps in and says, hey, Barbara, you know, you really ignored your direct report in there who was offering some good decisions. You need to take care of that. That's not modeling the behavior that you want. So the president can play that kind of a role. And by the way, that's not something the president would do publicly necessarily. She might take Barbara aside later, maybe over a cup of coffee, and quietly encourage her to get back on board. A student-centered lens. You guys have answered that question very well. What's it all about? It's about the student. So a student-centered lens is indeed a core ingredient. It becomes a framework for developing and discussing a common vision, a common commitment up and down the organizational hierarchy, across departments and divisions, to identify those policies, practices, and processes that you're working on. This is very important because a student-centered lens actually can become the rallying cry. This actually becomes a way, a move is what Gillies would call it, a strategic move to help people talk about, we're in this to fix things for students so that they can be more successful, not because it's better for my division or your division or this department or that department. It really is about how we come together to help the student. Communication, another one of our core ingredients, broad-based and inclusive. You have to share about progress towards institutional redesign, but also about progress in terms of collaborative decision making. In other words, this can't be a great communication just among your team. There are lots of other people that are going to be impacted by the decisions and the things that you're doing, and they need to know that this is going on. Not just about your concrete project, but also about a new way that we're going to collaborate and work together to solve problems to benefit students. The use of data and evidence, another core ingredient. Probably not something that you Achieving the Dream folks would be confused about, right? This is a core principle of Achieving the Dream. And it's also a core ingredient of change. And it has to be a formal mechanism, right? There has to be a way to collect certain information, report on it, to support the policy changes, the practices that you're trying to implement, the impact of those changes on outcomes, right? And that's all good. And I imagine many of you are doing that well or superbly as part of Achieving the Dream. But there's also a need for data and information about how different stakeholders on campus are embracing or resisting this new way of working together. This actually was the thing that I'm not sure anybody did very well in this particular project. It was really hard for folks to think back reflectively and intentionally and collect data about how they're working together. It was easy to get focused on collecting data on, did this project do what it was supposed to do? Are we making progress? Is it affecting the students? That was easier to do. Reflecting on your own behavior in a systematic way was a lot harder. I'm not sure anybody really did that all that well. And lastly, but not by any means the least, you'll see around the circle of this notion of reflection. This is something also that's very hard, but it is vital. The idea that you would take the time to stop and slow down and have a regularly scheduled, structured process to reflect on the key relationships and the collaboration that you're doing. right? Not just reflecting on the progress that you're making in your project, no, reflecting on the way you're working together, making adjustments, highlighting some really good examples, noting, hey, you know, we're doing this over here now, highlighting those types of successes, and this has to be intentional, and it has to be practiced campus-wide. Now, in the FIPSE project, Kingsborough encouraged and sort of played sort of a catalyst role with the 4 participating colleges, bringing them to institutes and things like that, where reflection was structured and sort of making that happen. They did coaching visits in which this happened. They did follow-up emails and happened. The development evaluation team, we played that role for Kingsborough. We sort of pushed them to reflect back retrospectively about these things in order to create the types of frameworks and tools that you're using today. So these are the core ingredients, and I think we're going to spend some time now doing an exercise with Marissa about these core ingredients, because they're all important, but it probably isn't going to play out the same way at every college. It certainly didn't play out the same way at the 4 participating colleges. And so we're going to walk through that exercise together with you and see what we can learn.
All right, so I'm a very visual person, and I'm that person who's always doodling and circling things and drawing arrows as I take notes in meetings and classes. And so when this fabulous visual came up, the first thing I did was try to figure it out. I'm also kinesthetic, so what I instantly saw was upside down pyramid. Okay, it's balancing. Therefore, intentionality at the bottom, that's the crux. That's what everything is being supported by. But if it's just balancing on its point, it's going to topple over. And so the reflection on either side, if you remember those Weeble toys back when I was a kid, it'll never fall over because it's got that reflection to kind of keep it going. And I thought, well, this is a really great idea, and this is a really nice structure, but what if intentionality isn't the linchpin, if you will, at your campus? Or what if communication and use of data up in those far corners, what if that doesn't make sense in your case? And so then I went crazy, and Derek had to talk me down because I was going to have you building origami and stuff like that today. But what I did do, he couldn't stop me all the way. So I came up with a couple of different visuals, a few different visuals that I thought could apply. And really, it's infinite. It could be Mickey Mouse. Why not, right? But let me talk you through these graphics, because there's actually some meaning to them. Perhaps at your school, we talk about going where the students are, meeting them where they're at. And we have to do that with ourselves too. And we, Kingsborough, had to recognize that where our partner institutions were was not necessarily where we were. Not that they didn't have some or all or elements of the core ingredients that we were working with, but that they might not be configured in the same way. So perhaps if you look at the upper right, that sort of wagon wheel, that's what I see it as. In this case, what we imagine is you're at an institution, you've got something working really well. Maybe it is that presidential leadership that we heard about that's so great and supportive. And so that's your way in. And at your school, you've got to balance it differently. Every school has to balance it the way it works for them. So presidential leadership would be the axle on that wagon wheel. And the reflection, which I envision as sort of the tire tread on that wagon wheel, is the thing that's going to encircle everything, keep it moving, keep it round, hold it together. And then the pieces may line up, the other elements, around the spokes. Well, what if you're a school that has more than one thing? You feel confident, you've got a few things. And I think at Kingsborough, we had easily 3 or 4 anchors at the beginning through our hindsight. And so maybe we had something like this, where we had an anchor in each corner of our triangle. Maybe we had the presidential leadership, side-by-side collaboration, and the data. And then from those 3 things, we start to stack up. Maybe we're looking at the pyramid this time from above, looking down. And that circle in the middle, those are 3 more elements kind of stacking up and rising towards a peak, and always the orange reflection on the outside. Or perhaps at your school, it's something more like this. You have the beginnings of an element, right on the back end of this feathery piece. You've got something that's kind of working, but it needs to continue, it needs to develop. And as you're working on that, you can put together a few other pieces that are out there and sort of need to be developed. And soon you've got a good core of elements, and you start lining things up one after another, and it comes in a more linear fashion. And the reflection is always going to help drive you forward. The reflection will always contain. So these are just a few of the visuals that you could use to think about how these elements might line up at your school. And what I invite you to do right now, you can do it on your own, you can work with your table. Ideally, even if you start on your own, you'll start sharing with colleagues at the table. I'd like you to think about your institution, think about the project that we keep having you come back to today, and think about our 7 essential elements, and try to figure out, how do they line up for you? What do you have? Do you have anchors? Do you have a single entry point? Do you have a sort of linear projection? It's easy, though, to think about what we have. I want you to also think about what you don't have. What's the biggest challenge? Which of these ingredients you think you need to work towards? And if you're really creative and you want to try to come up with a graphic, that's great, and I'd love to see it, but there will be no grading on the art component today. So we'll give you a few minutes to sit and work at your tables and think about your elements and how they line up at your institution.
Let's do verse 2.
All right. Was there anyone brave enough to draw your own shape? There was a wager up front. They said someone in this room is going to have drawn their own shape. Oh, too bad. I guess I'm the only doodly kind of freak in this room. That's okay. So tell me about your conversations. I'm interested first. Let me hear, and I think this one you could shout out. What are you not worried about? What do you have on your campuses? Which ingredient is there? You're good. Anything? We're in ATD. I'm glad to hear that. What a presidential engagement. Super. What else is there? Great intentionality. Student-centered lens. Beautiful. All right. Well, those 4 came really easily, and those are our 4 fabulous ones because each one can drive you. If you've got the data, you want to explain it. If you've got the student-centered lens, you're going to feel it. If you've got intentionality, well, that's the road you're driving on. And if you've got presidential leadership, that can get an awful lot done. So in your conversations, what wasn't there? What was the challenge on your campus, John?
Student-centered learning. I want to just unpack that for just a second because I'm not on my cell phone because I'm being rude. I'm on my cell phone because I'm helping the student correspondence research teams, and they're tweaking their experiences here, and they're coming in and saying, I was in a workshop and people wanted to know why a student was here. And another one said, I was in a workshop and I had to leave because they were blaming the students for the problem as opposed to the system or the curriculum. So I'm wondering about how we may give lip service to student-centered learning, student-centered, but that really is a paradigm shift because we're really trained to do for them and not with them. And so I'm wondering, as we look at these core things, and we're talking about side-by-side leadership, does that include students as well as academics and student support, so that it's a true collaboration and we're not just doing it to them, but doing it with them. So I see student services both as being there, student-centered as being there, but I also see it as not being there, at least from the data that the students are tweaking right now.
Thank you so much. That's a really important point, and I have to say, one of the challenges that we met, the Kingsborough team, is at some point we said, we're talking about student-centered, where are our students? And we had to stop and realize we hadn't brought them in yet. And so we did actually bring in some student voices, and I don't think we do that enough. I think most of us don't do that enough. And actually one of the 4 college campuses, Norwalk, brought a student on their team to the Summer Institute. So we are mindful of that, and I think we all, as practitioners and faculty and administrators, we need to bring them into the room. You're right, we shouldn't just do it to them, we should do it with them. So that's a good one to challenge anyone who thought, yeah, we've got the student-centered under control. Let's bring it back to Joy's challenge. What other things, what was not there?
I think for us, and I imagine for many other institutions, it's the actual reflection piece. It's the taking the time to think about how a certain interaction went or the means that we used to get to the end that we had in mind. And I know that scores on our 360 data for our leadership. That continually scores near the bottom of all the items as my leader takes time for self-reflection. We just don't seem to give that time or feel like that's a value add.
Thank you, Tim. That is hard. And one of the lessons that we wanted to come out of today is that this is not easy. This is hard stuff. And having developmental evaluators was fabulous, but it also put us in the hot seat. And they would sit us down at a table and say, okay, answer these questions that you're making everyone else answer. And we didn't always remember to leave our egos and titles at the door, and we didn't always agree, and we didn't always get along. And sometimes we had those hard conflicts, and sometimes we resolved them nicely, and sometimes we resolved them not so nicely, but we resolved them because we were doing that hard work. We were sitting down and thinking, how is this going? What are we doing? We have to practice what we teach. We have to model. We can't just sit back and assume it's going to be there. And have you noticed that, we educators, we're like the worst students? We sit at the back of the room. We don't like to read. We don't like to speak. We kind of turn the other way when it becomes interactive. We're just like our students. And so we had to confront that. We had to do the work too. Is there anything else that stuck out to you as a challenge?
I think knowing how much communicate when and to whom is crucial. And it's precarious. Because when you're in the midst of details of grappling through how is this going to work, and it seems pretty clouded, communicating that to the wrong person at that time might signal problems that we don't think of as problems, but they're part of the process. So of all of those elements, I think that communication becomes the most fragile and vulnerable area, if I can put it that way.
I think you could put it that way, absolutely. It's wonderful. And it's tricky. And what about those of us, and I'm guilty of this, I rely on text messages now because it's shameful and it's easier than calling someone. And then my phone dies and it's like, oh, I need to communicate this with my voice. I'm kind of revealing my age a little bit, but communication, something as simple as that, can actually prevent what was otherwise a smoothly operating communication system. And it's much bigger than that, of course. All right, one more challenge. Any other that struck you as we're going to need to work on this? You've worked hard enough. You haven't worked hard enough. You've never worked hard enough. That's the goal, right? This is hard. Anything good is worth working for. And we won't lie to you. It's not easy. And it's not about any one product. We're not saying that institutional change is an attainable thing. What we're saying is that it is a process. It is an ongoing, reiterative, reflective process. And it never ends, and that's what makes it so good. Is that a question?
It is. I'm just curious what you all think about, sometimes you actually could get there to a point, and the problem is then the players change. So there might be a process going on at a particular school and it's working and people have learned to communicate and work well together and boom, new president. And so, I don't know, if somebody from Kingsborough wants to talk to that.
What a great and timely question. A great and timely question. May I use this to transition us? All right. So what I was about to share with you is that you may feel like you've gotten there. You may feel like you've reached it. And you may even glide or relax or coast for a while on some great success and on these new ways of communicating and collaborating and mining the data and doing all this good stuff and feel great. You have sort of a eureka moment. And you do what we did. You look back and you say, wow, these past 10 years were amazing. And then what happens? Your president retires and your VP jumps ship. And then everyone has to sort of shift around to fill in the gaps. And Kingsborough now is in a very different place than we were when we began this project. We have, at this moment, a brand new university chancellor, an interim president, an interim provost, an interim VP of finance. We have a new dean for academic affairs. We have a relatively new dean for student affairs. Some of the players are the same, just wearing different hats. Some of them are new. And everything we were able to take for granted for a while, we can no longer take for granted. But here's the good thing. We've been through the process. We've done our practice. We continue to do our practice. And we have come out of it with safe spaces and a sort of a campus culture that is so different than it was 10 years ago. A campus culture where collaboration is expected, where when our presidential search committee came around to ask folks, what are you looking for in your next president? Everyone said a collaborator, a leader who works with the people, a president who is going to listen to the faculty, who's going to support academic and student affairs together. Because that's our new normal, and that's the goal, is to create a new normal that you can springboard off of. So I'm going to let the rest of the panelists speak a few sort of summing remarks, I think.
Wow, I think for me as an administrator, I have this rule, and that is if people can't talk to you, they are talking to somebody else about the fact that they can't talk to you. So I always keep that in mind, that whatever it is, you have to be willing to hear it. So we had a product of a student resource manual. That was our final product for our Kingsborough, the jigsaw piece. But what was more so meaningful for us, or for me, was that we are committed to working together to make our students more successful, and that regardless of what our feelings are, we have to check our egos and all the things that go under ego, and be committed to working for the students, because that's what it's all about for us on our campus.
Yeah, I guess it was in 2011, something like that, 2010, they actually bought into this, and we knew we had to change, and we wanted to change. We weren't sure exactly how to do that, what steps to take, where to go. And so through this process and being asked the difficult questions and going to Kingsborough 2 summers and then having on-site visits and Gilly's calling us in between and asking us tough questions, having to write lots and lots of stuff, we slowly began to change the way we did business with one another. And then the way we did business with one another spilled over campus-wide. I think today, if you were to walk on our campus, the feeling would be palpable compared to what it was 2 years ago. That journeys that ultimately maximize our potential, it's a journey. It hadn't been a straight line uphill journey. We've taken dives and back steps, but we're moving forward steadily. And we are moving forward with projects that we think are helping our students be more successful. And that's our focus in every single meeting. And it's not success as we define success, but it's success that we keep focused as the students would define themselves being successful, which could be very different.
There was another piece of the project that seemed to really make a difference. If you can just imagine a really hot July afternoon, really beautiful space on the Kingsborough campus, big windows. This team and the 3 other teams are there, and the Kingsborough team is there. And the teams have the president and then people from student affairs and academic affairs, and they have to have some faculty. And if any one group, and the expectation was they would work through questions and work on their projects and reflect on their process. And the evaluators, developmental evaluators would go around and listen in and ask questions. So if you started to flag and think, I don't really feel like talking to the people on my campus anymore, you could look over at another table, and that team would be having a moment of really good energy for talking with each other. Or if a person in a kind of senior position thought, I don't really have to talk to people, there was this visible presence of other teams, and all of a sudden, wow, the person who's the best listener over on this side of the room is the most senior person at the table. Well, that sends this visual cue about what does it look like when schools are actually practicing collaborative leadership and really trying to take each other seriously in terms of process. So being able to do it as a cohort where some parts of the work were visible to everybody else, being able to share drafts to other teams, with other teams in our interviews, again, people said it wasn't just that they thought they could learn from Kingsborough, it was that the opportunity to be in a structured learning environment to make themselves more effective was really exciting, and they were glad to be at Kingsborough and interested to learn from Kingsborough, but it wasn't a replication project per se. It was more about, let's create a time and a space for people outside of our campus and then with our campus to talk about how we could organize ourselves better, and nobody felt they could have done that all by themselves had they stayed home.
So back to this point of practicing moves and the point about reflection. This self-assessment checklist is a really, really important tool. And can you imagine that you're in a team, gone all the way to Brooklyn, and it turns out that half of your team thinks something is working well, most of the others think it's problematic. I mean, there you are. People have filled it out individually, and they have reasons for saying that. And so then we begin. What happens if the president thinks it's working well? Other people think it's problematic. What happens if someone thinks they're making progress and someone else thinks it hasn't been addressed yet? And so reflection has teeth. Individual accountability and then collective accountability. Accountability for saying what your actual experience is with good reasons, and being able and being given permission and being encouraged to talk about it so you can learn this side-by-side collaboration. That is super important. And when we were listening to teams and calling them up, often it was because there were splits. There was real disagreement on how things were going. Everyone cared that their project would be successful, but it was how they were getting there that caused the concerns sometimes, as well as the celebration. So, for reflection, but give it some teeth. Make sure it has individual responsibility and collective accountability.
So as a FIPSE project, we had to submit a final report to FIPSE, which we've done so. Whether or not that ever goes up on a website anywhere, like they say, I have no idea. I'm sure 12 people have read it if we're lucky. But we hope to turn this into a product that can be more readily available to everyone. One of the key lessons that I've been asked to talk about here is that we've identified these core ingredients from the work during this 2-3 year window. We think these are good core ingredients. They may not be the only core ingredients, but in this particular case, there were the 7 that really made sense to everyone to work on. We also developed this theory of change that says there's lots of pockets of innovation that people work on. You keep working on it in these new ways, and over time a breakthrough occurs. But the key lesson when I pull all that together is it's not predictable. In fact, I think it's fair to say that none of the partner colleges necessarily had a huge breakthrough moment. Halifax talked about their side-by-side collaborative leadership. They nailed that ingredient, and it was massive for them. And now that's starting. I might even think they were Marissa's push point, the one in the left-hand corner where they really nailed that side-by-side leadership, and now these other things are pushing forward to help them make progress. They're on their way, and as they continue to practice that side-by-side leadership and in other core ingredients, in other projects, they're going to have a breakthrough where suddenly they're going to look down and go, wow, we're really doing well by our students. How did that happen? And they're going to reflect back again and realize that it started perhaps in 2010 when they had a side-by-side leadership moment. But it's not predictable. I wish we could have learned that if you do these things in this way, that here's the recipe, and just go do this, and you guys are going to transform your institutions, but actually the lesson's opposite of that. You might transform your institution if you focus on these key ingredients, if you practice over and over again. You create the possibility for institutional redesign, for transformation. The possibility becomes more likely, but there's no guarantee. And you've already named a number of reasons why that might be the case. Things change. It might be staff and roles. It might be the environment, the economy. It might be the context. It might be new policies that you have no control over at the state. Things change, but you have to keep focusing on this new way of working together to keep that possibility of redesign and breakthrough to happen. And that's the key thing. It's ongoing. So that's my final takeaway. Do we have any other final thoughts? Okay, then thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing this afternoon with us.